We bring now in to talk to us about all of this, Fox News senior political analyst Brit Hume. Brit, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this as this coverage gets underway with the loss of the former president, Jimmy Carter. Your thoughts as we look back on a man who had a great love story, lived as a long life of faith, and served as president as well, in the middle of all of this remarkable, long, enduring lifespan.
It was an extraordinary life and a very long life. He endured a lot of people probably could not have for a very long time. He was true to his faith, especially in his retirement. But he was his one-term presidency was politically unsuccessful. He lost badly in 1980 to Ronald Reagan, as has been noted. His presidency was not without some major successes, the Camp David Accords, as they're called, but between Egypt and Israel being the most noteworthy achievement, which I think he deserved a lot of credit for, because he was dogged in his pursuit of that agreement and presided over the talks at Camp David from which they emerged, from which that treaty emerged. And, he was plagued throughout his presidency by economic problems he seemed unable to deal with. Finally, he raised interest rates to try to he appointed Paul Volcker to be chairman of the Federal Reserve, who in turn raised interest rates to try to stop the runaway inflation, and in doing so raised interest rates to a point where nobody had ever really seen them before in any modern era. And he also had a lot of trouble overseas. The Iran hostage crisis, as has been mentioned, was a part of that. He was never able to get the hostages released, and finally they were on the day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated.
When we think about that, what's remarkable about all of those things unfolding, it happened in the 4 years of the presidency, and yet he lived this long life of service prior to the presidency and then continued to find ways to make remarkable changes and a remarkable life of service following the presidency. With humanities and the Habitat for Humanities building and teaching Sunday school well into his 90s. It's almost as impactful as any presidency would be. It's almost as if his impact just lasted far beyond the presidency, given this length of life that he had.
Yeah, and I think a great many Americans who might have voted against him or not thought well of his presidency have ended up admiring the way he's conducted himself as a past president, because he has been so true to his faith. He's worked hard for these charities. You always see pictures of him on a ladder somewhere with a hard hat on, hammering nails or doing whatever, helping Habitat for Humanity to build houses. He was quite strong in that regard, I think, and I think a lot of people admired that about him, whether they liked him politically or not.
One of the most remarkable things about Jimmy Carter, too, just becoming president. He's a remarkable campaigner. He was one of those folks that helped put the First in the Nation primary state of New Hampshire on the map with his campaign style, this very personable style, making inroads with people that otherwise would never have thought to give him the chance to be president.
Yeah, he really kind of put the Iowa caucuses on the map, Molly. Nobody ever paid much attention to them. New Hampshire's First in the Nation primary was always considered to be the event you had to hit first, and from which you could gain momentum. And he started going out to Iowa early in 1976, and maybe even earlier than that, the beginning of that year, and he practically lived out there for a while. And when the caucuses came around, he'd put so much effort out there that they got more attention than they had ever previously gotten. And he won the caucuses, and he was off to the races. And in the aftermath of Watergate, of course, there was a certain tailwind behind any Democratic nominee, and Carter made the most of that. He presented himself as a simple man. He used to you'd see pictures of him getting off his campaign plane, and he'd have his clothing bag slung over his shoulder. That wasn't something that people might have thought was particularly presidential, but at that moment in American political history, it seemed a welcome sight to many Americans who thought, well, now here's a regular guy, because they hadn't thought that the Republicans, and particularly in the Nixon administration, were a bunch of regular guys at all. So it helped him for a long time, I think, although by the time he was president, and he seemed to be overwhelmed by events, being a little regular guy didn't necessarily play that well.
Yes, and a remarkable personality all along the way, that is for certain. Brit Hume, thank you so much. We're glad we were able to reach you, and thank you so much for coming on to talk to us.
Glad to talk to you, Molly. Thank you. Sorry about this. It's sad to see his passing, although he certainly lived a long life.
He certainly did, a remarkable one.